Good afternoon. I have a few different things on my mind as I start this live stream. Nice to see you all here. This one was announced in advance, and I have a little bit of a crowd just as I hit the record button. As per usual, if you guys want to share the link, do it with people who'd actually be interested in joining the conversation. You might know some people, people you've known for years on Facebook. You might know people on Twitter or Tumblr or whatever platform you use. But I don't encourage you to spam random Reddit forums with my videos. But if you know someone who'd actually be interested in joining the conversation, it might be worthwhile let them know this is going on. A few different things in my mind. This has been the week in which the protests in Glasgow, Scotland, arose and fell. And I made a series of videos really warning people about what Extinction Rebellion were planning and promising to do. And of course, they accomplished nothing of the sort. It's also a week in which the following brief commentary arose in my Patreon forum. So one Patreon asked the question in response to a recent video of mine. This really begs the question as to why so many intellectuals live such lonely, miserable existences that often end in suicide or death by alcoholism. So this is not me speaking. This is one of my supporters on Patreon speaking. I continue the quotation. I'd say that developing the life of the mind comes with the risk of attracting people that will take the most intimate parts of you, intellectual property. Now, I think he's very poorly expressing a good or interesting point there. When we say someone takes your intellectual property, normally you mean something like you wrote a song and they stole the song from you or something. You created a cartoon character and they made their own comic book or movie of your cartoon character. I do not think that's what this person meant here. Years ago, I can remember talking about how people cope with being judged and judging others and the relentless shallowness of our society in so many ways. But whenever I made those videos, I would point out, by contrast or in close parallel, that being judged based on your intelligence or being judged based on the quality of your writing and so on and so forth, being judged on your intellectual merit can be even more heartbreaking. So, it's one thing to talk about being rejected because you're not thin enough or not handsome enough or not tall enough or something. Okay, that may sting, it may hurt your feelings, but it's kind of shallow and limited. But being judged for your intellectual properties, shall we say, that can be much more hard to cope with. Anyway, so we have a few different replies to this within my Patreon group, but one of them from a guy named Joel, who's had a few messages back and forth with me lately. And Joel seems to be a very young man. I don't know. I'm guessing he's 17 or 18 years old, something like that. Anyway, Joel says, quote, I think you're just talking about people who are gullible. From my perspective, these aren't intellectuals. Now, this is the interesting thing to me. The moment I laid eyes on this question or comment from a member of the audience, that's the first thing I thought, is that the people you're talking about are not intellectuals. This is one of the reasons I want to do this live stream. Now, on what basis? So I've already read you. It's a very brief statement. He says, well, this begs the question of why so many intellectuals live lonely, miserable existence that end in suicide or death by alcoholism. I don't regard people who drink alcohol as intellectuals. Like, I know that may sound ridiculous to many of you, but if you know what I mean by intellectual, it totally excludes people drinking alcohol. Now, I'll give you another example that comes closer to my heart. You guys may know I have some admiration for the books written by George R.R. Martin. Right. So George R.R. Martin most famously wrote a book called Game of Thrones that was made into a TV show. He's been author of many things over many years. So Frida's one step ahead. Frida just says, or the ones that watch football. Yeah. Well, you get a really strong sense that George R.R. Martin is not an intellectual, not by my standards at least, from the fact that he has a lifelong football watching habit. If you go to his blog, you will find that every second or third entry on his blog, he's talking about what happened in this week's game, what happened in one football game or another. He's poured a huge number of hours into watching football his entire life. Now, I also don't know how much or how little alcohol George R. R. Martin consumes. I just don't know. But I did. I listened to many of his books and short stories as audiobooks, as work on tape. That was back when I was lifting weights in Kunming, China. I was at the gym for long hours, and I was listening to his work. Well, something else that is really striking is how little progress he's made intellectually. He had just a few themes, a few things he was concerned about, a few issues he was thinking about in the 1970s. And then in the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, 2010s, there's very little progress. Now, again, I'm not even saying this is something that intellectuals strive to accomplish. I think if you're an intellectual and you're living a life of the mind and you're not an alcoholic, you're not getting drunk 3 days a week, you're not watching football 3 days a week, it's just inevitable that even if you have no redeeming qualities whatsoever, you're making progress and you really have different concerns and different interests in life. I'm saying to you completely seriously, if George R. R. Martin lived like an intellectual, there's no way his works from the 1970s would have so much in common with things he's written in the 1990s or 2000s. He would have, again, without making any particular effort, without wanting to change, you'd change. Now, look, I have a great guinea pig here in the room with me right now. But I mean, I myself, I'm a guinea pig with this. It's amazing to me how much I've changed in the last 4 years, how much I've learned, how much I've changed. But I mean, I can ask Melissa about that. Like, I mean, any of the books you've been reading in the last 4 years, I mean, you have not picked up a single book with the thought, this is going to make me a better person or this is going to make me a different person. None of this is read with a sort of self-help motivation or in you're not seeking out some kind of personal transformation. But, you've changed. You learn new things. Like, sorry, I've said this before on the channel. You might have heard me say this before, but think about the meaning of the word perspective. The difference between seeing something that's close up to you as enormous and understanding its true size, its true significance in perspective, seeing things in perspective. I mean, even if you don't want to change, you change. There's an example on the front page of the New York Times, the Sunday, so yesterday's copy of the New York Times. The front page story is about the U.S. military improperly dropping a bomb that killed 50 to 70 civilians. Pardon me. This was in the war against ISIS in Syria. Okay. So I'm not doubting the basic premise of this story. There was a drone strike. Something was wrong or stupid or misguided about this drone strike. It's not known. It's not known who pulled the trigger or who decided to carry out this drone strike. And they killed 50 to 70 civilians in ISIS territory. If I had read that story when I was 16 years old, right, I would not see it in perspective. That's not like a simple judgment of right or wrong, but oh yeah, you know what? Villages get burned down, women and children get massacred in war, and you can gain a sense of perspective by reading about the history of the Napoleonic Wars. Just recently, I've been reading a lot about the American Revolutionary War, which many people today are strangely ignorant of. There are all these celebrations of American independence, but what actually happened in that war? What was happening politically at the time? You gain perspective. So, I just say things great and small in my life like that really make me aware of these things. And I just say I don't think that is moral relativism. I don't think that's going from being a morally judgmental person to being a non-judgmental person or anything of the kind. But sorry, but I mean, any given topic, how do you think about democracy and how do you think about war and how do you think about peace? These things, when you're really learning, when you're really engaged in life of the mind, when you're really engaged in research of any kind for any purpose, you gain perspective. Sorry, this is way off topic, but just to give an example where I've become more judgmental, not less. Because some of you will have heard that example and okay, well, back when you were 17, you were naive and you would have thought this was a terrible crime against humanity to drop a bomb that kills 50 to 70 people. And now you've loosened up because you've gotten used to the stakes of war kind of thing. Okay, well, look, you know what? The more I know about gambling, the more judgmental I am. I have no tolerance for it. I have no, you know what I mean? If you say it doesn't mean I'm more accepting of gambling. The more I know about drug addiction, the less tolerant I am. The more I really, believe in very, very harsh forms of coercion to eliminate and punish, drug addiction. The more I know even about prescription drug addiction, and, mind-altering drugs that are sold as antidepressants and so on and so forth. So-called psychiatric medicines, most of which have been debunked and proven to have really terrible side effects and either absolutely no benefit or an incredibly trivial benefit relative to these side effects. So just say it's not the case that as you grow and you gain perspective, that everything recedes toward the horizon. Everything seems smaller and seems less important. Some things may seem more important. Some things you may be more judgmental of. But anyway, it's just fine. So just say this is not the only concern in my mind. It's not the only thing on my plate. I have this conversation I'm going to return to here in my Patreon. I have the fact that in the last week, we've seen the rise and fall of Extinction Rebellion and their grand ploy to change the history of the world at Glasgow, when, what is to be done about, global warming came to the fore. It was briefly within the British Isles. They didn't have to fly away. I mean, imagine if that conference had taken place in Vietnam. Imagine if that had been in Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City. Like, what would they have been able to do? And they would be in a much less comfortable prison for a much longer time. Okay, well, conveniently, this was in Glasgow, Scotland, so right in their homeland, right in their crosshairs, and we got to see just how little was accomplished by their form of so-called peaceful protest. So we've just lived through that. And I'd say too, something else that's on my mind now more than ever, related to both of these former, so there's the third category, but both the two categories I've just mentioned, it's just the reality of the fake vegans among us, the fake vegans who lead the movement, the fake vegans who make money off of the movement, the fake vegans who are very often the most prominent people, whether it's on YouTube or in terms of the organization of the movement. You guys, sorry, some of you may have already seen this, some of you will not. I just posted to my blog this image. It's very simply a quotation from Georges Monbiot. Georges Monbiot, one of the most powerful and influential people of the last century to be in the press. It's ridiculous. I mean, who has been more powerful and influential if you look at the whole century? I mean, George W. Bush was only in power for 8 years, but Georges Monbiot has had this bully pulpit of his for a much, much longer time, and it's not over yet. So if you guys haven't seen this quotation before, you can click on the link I've just put in the comment section. So the title of this article is, quote, "I've converted to veganism to reduce my impact on the living world," close quote. Now, he chose to use the term converted to veganism. He didn't say, I've been trying to cut down on my meat consumption. I've been trying to adopt a more moderate, no, he says converted to veganism. He doesn't even say he's trying to adjust his diet to be more vegan. No, it's an ideological phrasing. Quote, "I have converted to veganism," close quote. And now I've just given you in this illustration, jumping ahead to what from myself is the crucial paragraph of this article, because there is a lot of meandering bullshit about the relationship of ecology to veganism, if you read the thing as a whole. Quote, "Since then, I have cut almost all animal products from my diet. Period. I'm not religious about it. Period." Now, already there, close quote, already there. If you're not religious about it, maybe you shouldn't have used the phrasing, "I've converted to veganism." I'll continue here. Quote, "If I'm at a friend's house, I might revert to vegetarianism. If I'm away from home, I will take a drop of milk in my tea. About once a fortnight, I have an egg for my breakfast." Sorry, close quote. This isn't the end of the quote, believe it or not. Oh, well, gee, it doesn't sound like you've converted to veganism. No, it sounds like you eat milk and eggs and meat, as this goes on, whenever it's convenient for you. Oh, and I'm sorry. So about once every 2 weeks, you have an egg for breakfast. So do you go to the grocery store and buy one egg? Is that you go to the butcher and say, yes, I'd like to buy one egg? Or do you buy 12 eggs in a case that sit in your fridge all the time? I don't believe you, homeboy. I think your household is buying and consuming a dozen eggs a week because eggs don't last very long. I don't think you buy one egg once every 2 weeks. And if you did, you would still not be vegan. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, sorry, just continue here. So, quote, about once a fortnight, I have an egg for my breakfast, comma, perhaps once a month, a fish I catch. About once a month, he eats a fish that he catches and kills himself. Continuing the quotation, or a herring or some anchovies. And now he adds in parentheses, if you eat fish, take them from the bottom of the food chain, close parentheses, period. Yes, that obviously is the moral that vegans would insist on here. Yes, as if it's fine to eat animals as long as they're closer to the bottom of the food chain. That would be a very different philosophy, wouldn't it? Maybe an interesting one, but no, that's not veganism. All right, continue the quotation here. Quote, perhaps 3 or 4 times a year on special occasions, I will eat farmed meat. Colon, partly out of greed, partly because I don't want to be even more of a specter at the feast than I am already. Close quote. So again, he said he converted to veganism. In reality, he eats meat whenever it is convenient for him. Like, oh, how much more often could you possibly eat meat given your conviction that you're saving the planet? This is supposedly an ecological vegan. You don't have the conviction. You don't want to be a specter. So, like, let's just say I don't know which event he's alluding to, which religious occasion or what have you he's alluding to here. But he says he doesn't want to be a specter at the event. Oh, okay. So you don't want to slightly inconvenience your father-in-law. Is that what it is? You go over to your father-in-law's house to celebrate whatever godforsaken holiday you celebrate, right? Oh, well, you know what you could do? Like even here in Victoria, there's a vegan restaurant. It's not great. It's really not. But there's a vegan Chinese restaurant here. If you've really been watching my YouTube channel for a long time, you've seen my review of that Chinese restaurant. I've reviewed it on my channel. Okay, they don't recognize me when I go to that restaurant, so I guess they don't watch my YouTube channel. They don't know I review them. Oh, okay. Well, if I got to go eat with my father-in-law, and I don't want to impose on him to make vegan food, I can go to that Chinese restaurant. I can get takeout vegan food, and I can bring that to the dinner, to the event. I can bring my own food. Why? Because it matters. I'm sorry, but now look, in terms of how I feel about this is what I think about this. There are the conclusions I come to. Why is it that the very people who have gotten rich and famous out of veganism and out of ecology more broadly are the people who lack, the level of commitment, the level of self-discipline to actually live the lifestyle? Sorry. Who has made more money out of veganism than George Monbiot? Who has gotten more fame out of veganism than George Monbiot? And in his case, it's veganism and ecology. You know what I'm saying? It's not just one thing, and it's his whole act, even in that one article and in YouTube videos he's uploaded this month and so on. It's very much about how veganism and ecology are linked to one another. Okay, so as a simple matter of principles, a simple matter of self-discipline. And look, guys, especially in the current context, this is now November of 2021, nothing else is veganism. Like, this is going to sound weird. George Monbiot, he's kind of an old, ugly guy. How old is George Monbiot? I could have asked my robot friend here. So he's 58. Okay, 58 years old. He's not the best looking guy. Imagine if he had written the same article saying that he absolutely never sleeps with prostitutes. And let's say the title isn't that he's decided to never sleep with prostitutes. It could even be he's converted to anti-prostitutism, or he's converted to Catholicism for the matter. Maybe a poor choice of example. So he's made an ideological commitment that he's never going to sleep with prostitutes. But he does maybe 3 or 4 times a year. But he says, but about 3 or 4 times a year, he does. Okay, it's kind of weird. It's kind of fucked up. I would have more sympathy for that than what he's saying here. And I'd be able to look at that and be like, well, this is an ugly older guy who's, down on his luck or something, whatever. This is his attitude. This, he's written this article honestly saying that he's morally opposed to prostitution, but he nevertheless is a client or engages in it 3 or 4 times a year. Like, I know it's going to sound weird, but like, there's a kind of nobility in that. There's a kind of just the vulnerability of being willing to say, hey, this is something morally wrong, and I'm going to admit that I do it. I'm going to write about it. Honestly, there's a weird kind of nobility in that, saying like, look, this is something I disapprove of, and I do anyway. Well, my point here is now again, sorry, my point here is not that I would applaud him for sleeping with prostitutes. The point is, nothing else is veganism. Nothing else has this moral significance for the question of who you are, what kind of person you want to be. Obviously, for the animals themselves that are born and raised in captivity and tortured to death for your momentary delectation. The nutritional value is nil or it's negative, et cetera, et cetera. You guys know that whole side of it. But especially Georges Monbiot is the most famous ecologist of his generation. He is the most famous and the most powerful, and he did nothing to earn it. He was just selected to be the science writer for this incredibly powerful newspaper, uniquely powerful newspaper in England. And then ever since then, he's sat on his throne. And that is what he continues to do. And he's appeared numerous times on the YouTube channel of Extinction Rebellion. And he has apparently participated in a protest and been arrested at least once for Extinction Rebellion. Now, so you're allegedly willing to go to jail for your convictions. Allegedly. This is also a kind of weird pantomime farce. None of these people really believe they're going to do hard time, in jail. They all assume that, the system supports them and so on and so forth. But someone like this cannot even maintain, cannot simply be 100% vegan, cannot actually be vegan, cannot live up to the headline of his own article, quote, I've converted to veganism to reduce my impact on the living world. Now, look, sorry, I'm coming back to column 1 and column 2 here, talking about what it means to be an intellectual and so on. If you guys have a second, hit the thumbs up button. It's great. I have 30 people in the audience, and I do appreciate that. I've looked at some other much more famous YouTubers' live streams, and they actually do not get as many people in the audience as I do. Or some of them, they have an audience 1,000 times larger than mine, but they only have twice as many people in the audience as I do. This kind of thing. So I do appreciate people showing up. And again, I have a sense of what this conversation is about. And if you want to go and send an invitation to some friend of yours or something who you think might actually benefit from joining in. The other side of it is this. Aaron Janis went crazy, burnt out, still vegan, so far as I know, lives a 100% vegan lifestyle, 100% vegan diet. She has the self-discipline to maintain a vegan diet, but nothing else. James Aspie went crazy, burnt out, still has the self-discipline to maintain a vegan diet, doesn't have the self-discipline to do anything else. It's bizarre. Now, some of you may vaguely recall the legend of James Aspie's OnlyFans. Check it out today. It's gone. He's deleted it. He went off the deep end. He deleted a large part of his social media presence, and he stopped uploading to YouTube. He stopped doing much of anything. Now, yeah, what does it take out of you to maintain an OnlyFans? Check his Patreon. People are still paying him money on Patreon. He has not updated or posted to Patreon since 2018. When I go to the front page of my Patreon, not logged in as myself, when I go in as a stranger, it tells me that I upload more than 10 times a week, that I post something to Patreon, and believe it. I'm posting all kinds of stuff, including some videos that aren't posted publicly, but also just graphics, images, commentary, text. I'm posting all kinds of things. Used to do podcasts, but anyway, whatever. Podcasts are out of style. This is 2021. I post all kinds of things to my Patreon. I talk to my followers. So that $1 that $1 a month. Okay, so again, these are some of the people who've made the most money out of the movement. And I'm drawing attention here to two types. There are the people who have gotten all this money and fame out of the movement, and they don't even have the self-discipline to be vegan. And there are people who got the money and fame out of the movement, but that seems to be all the self-discipline they've got. And otherwise, they've cracked up and fallen apart. And you can say they went crazy, or to some extent, they always were crazy. And, maybe we'll never know, right? Like maybe we'll never know just how crazy they were, aside from these other factors. Babe, could you turn that lamp off?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, thanks. So look, I don't have to keep giving examples of this. Okay, Henyamania. Again, of all the people, there was a time when I said openly she was not only the most successful vegan activist of that era, but one of the most successful of all time who's ever done it. But with the amount of money and fame she got from making very, very little effort on her part, the rewards she got were immense. Now, again, to my knowledge, she still is on a vegan diet, but she's lost the self-discipline and direction to do anything else with her life. So, another very strange one. Some of you will remember and some of you won't. Bite-sized vegan. She had so much support, so much just money pouring in for her. And look, what I'm about to say has nothing to do with jealousy. Like many of my viewers are also vegan activists. Some of you guys may feel jealous when you look at some of these people, and kind of so what? It's a feeling. I mean, it is what it is. Some of you may look at bite-sized vegan Emily, and you may think, wow, if you had that kind of support, if you had that kind of public interest, here's what you would have done with it. Some of you may look at Aaron Janis and think, wow, if you'd ever had that kind of public interest, public support, if you'd ever had this, here's what you would have done with it. James Aspey, it's ridiculous. Like, what talent did that guy ever have? It's ridiculous. But, starting with the mainstream media and a few individual people like Freely, there was this conspiracy to make him into a celebrity and to massively reward the very small efforts he made. Some of you may look at that and feel jealous and think that you would have done something so much more meaningful or impactful, or you or just still you'd do a better job if you were adventitiously put into James Aspey's position if you'd had, But the point I want to make here has nothing to do with jealousy and has nothing to do with those subjective feelings or those aspirations to make better use of the opportunities or resources that exist for these people. My point is instead to emphasize that those resources are incredibly finite. And the fact that one person has them means that nobody else has them. So the fact that Dr. Gregor has a sinking budget of over $1 million a year in donations coming in. So I've made videos in the past talking about the actual numbers. I'm not going to make a new video now. I'm going through his budget again. You can get the budget. You can get the numbers. You can look at how much it's a huge amount of money. Okay. There is somebody else who is not getting that $1 million. And I can point to the audience right now and say, it's you. Right? The millions of dollars, plural, that go into PETA, people with the ethical treatment of animals. It doesn't matter if you feel jealous about it or you feel positive. It really doesn't matter how you feel. The fact that that money is given to PETA, the fact that opportunity is created there for them at that time, this unique way, means that it doesn't exist for you and you and you. There's some other possibility there's another door that's being closed that this door can be open. Now, I'm just going to put that in human scale with a few other remarks. When I was involved in Buddhist studies, I really recognized this because I knew about Buddhist studies globally. So this is research and academic teaching related to Buddhism, which is supposedly something very different from the religion of Buddhism. In reality, they are inextricably intertwined. You could look at the whole island of Great Britain, and there would only be so many seats, so many chairs for professors in Buddhism. And then you could look at all of Europe, and then you could look at all of the world, like including Hong Kong and Thailand and Sri Lanka. It's like globally, there are only so many positions. There are only so many seats. And the fact that this seat, like one particular example, the fact that it was given to this crackpot, to this idiot, to this numbskull who's going to squander the opportunity, that has unbelievable implications for the whole field, like chair by chair, seat by seat. And when you look around the world, and those guys live a long time, they don't retire, they don't give up the seat and pass it on to someone else after 4 years, and there are no elections, and there are no explanations for why one guy got that opportunity and not another. The seats you hear nothing from. So I'll say further, some of those seats, some of those professorships, there's a big scandal. Something that gets into the. So there's one I talked about in a recent YouTube video. One of these guys, he was a professor of Buddhism in Denmark, and he became a neo-Nazi and got involved in Holocaust denial. And I was told by an eyewitness he also had Nazi tattoos on his body, and he was asked to resign. After he resigned, he was not replaced by a better man. They completely shut down the department, like the seat ceased to exist. This is another thing that happens. So that got into the newspapers. That got talked about. Oh, there's a professor of Buddhism who was a bit of a crazy Nazi, So when you say some of these people are eccentrics, okay, so that people hear about, and that they might be able to mentate that this is a waste, that this is a loss of opportunity. There's a finite amount of opportunity out there, and some of it was squandered by this guy. What's harder to see is that there are all these chairs, all these positions, all these opportunities, each one equating to $1 million or something, huge, large amounts of money involved with high-level academia, and the ones you hear nothing back from. Like, oh, yeah, I haven't really heard anything about Buddhist studies at the University of Toronto for a few years, whatever. It's just something, there has been no controversy. There has been no scandal, but there also haven't been any great accomplishments, right? There hasn't been, nothing has been done positively with that opportunity. Okay, that is actually the greater tragedy. And like, if you care about Buddhism as a religion, that completely condemns and ruins the future of Buddhism. That's the death of your religion. If you care about academia, it condemns and ruins the future of the university or of the discipline. And by the way, you could repeat this. What I've just said about Buddhist studies, you could say this also about a field like, say, anthropology. Anthropology, where there isn't a lot of money coming in, each seat, each professorship really matters for the future of anthropology, not just for the future of your own students, but for everyone else as well. So look, I had a conflict here. Believe me, this is right on topic. I had a conflict here with a guy named Jordan Reichert, and I made several videos talking about it. Now, it's not merely symbolic or conceptual to say, so we're now at about 8 years. All right, it's not, it's like 7.5 years. Okay, we'll say 7 years for the sake of it. I can say that in the last 7 years, he excluded me from every possible vegan forum, every possible vegan activist organization I could have been involved with here in the city of Victoria and in the adjacent city of Vancouver. Now, that includes just like having me removed from a Facebook group. I'm not allowed to join the Facebook group. I'm not allowed to attend the event. The event is kept secret from me, even though I signed the piece of paper creating the organization that hosted the event. Like the degree of kind of backstabbing and skullduggery and so on, where he was smiling to my face. At one point he was. He's not anymore. This is one guy who was the self-appointed Hitler of veganism in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. That's what he is. He's a petty tyrant. He's a little Hitler. Okay. Now, in this case, it's not just symbolic, or it's not just an economic argument, in the same sense that, look, $1 million being given to Wayne Seong, and $1 million being given to PETA, and $1 million being given to Dr. Greger. How many millions of dollars do you think we've got here, guys? Like, you think there's infinite opportunity for a movement as unpopular as ours? Okay, there is a real sense in which that hurts me and hurts all of you in the audience, because I'm not here to gas you up. I see we got Lydia in the audience. I see we got Frida in the audience. Okay, Lydia, you are smarter than Dr. Greger. All right, you, like all the people I know in this audience, you're all smarter than Dr. Greger. You're all smarter than Durian Ryder. You're all smarter than Freely. You're all smarter than Jordan Reichert. You're all really. You guys all have the potential to make more of an important difference for the future of this movement, and thus for the future of planet Earth, than Aaron Janis. Oh, let's really be good. Who in this audience, put your hands up if you genuinely think you're stupider than James Aspie. Put your hands up in the audience. Tell me who you are. If you think you're so stupid that the best way you can make a difference in the world and for the future of veganism is to give your money to James Aspie and let him talk for you. Let him do just like, well, look, look, when I go to the hospital, I don't tell the doctors how to do their job. I don't tell the surgeon how to do open chest surgery. By the same token, I've just got to trust James Aspie. I've just got to say, look, man, you're the dude. You're the dude with a scalpel in your hand. It's on you. You're like, does anyone feel that way? Does anyone feel they're so dumb they just have to hand over their money to James Aspie and leave him in charge of the movement, or let him speak for you? Let him speak on your behalf. Let him act on your behalf. I don't believe it. Like, I don't believe I have a single viewer today, and whatever, over time, this video may get 1,000 views or whatever it gets. I don't believe any of you really think you're that stupid. With someone like Jordan Reichert, it's much more direct because he's actually preventing me from attending vegan events, preventing me from speaking, preventing me from even being a member of the Facebook group. And look, the fact that Aaron Janis got that money and not you, right? You probably weren't asking. Probably because we're not doing fundraising, you weren't competing. Okay. It matters in this more indirect sense, right? In this city, how many talented, hardworking, brilliant vegans do you think we've got? Okay. So in Victoria, Canada, I think I'm the most famous vegan in this city. I don't have a lot of competition. Who's the guy across the street? Levi?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Across the street from me, there's a guy named Levi. He's got his own YouTube channel. It's terrible. I don't want to shout him out. It's a terrible YouTube channel. There's one other vegan YouTuber I know of in this town. Yeah, right. He's on the vegan spectrum. But anyway, guys, there's not a lot of competition here. Now, am I the most talented, most brilliant, most hardworking potential leader for veganism in Victoria and Vancouver, in Western Canada? Like, if we include Toronto and Montreal, maybe I've got some competition, but there's not a lot. In the whole country, in the whole of Canada, how many talented, ambitious people are there you can work with in veganism? Well, guess what? Because of this one asshole, Jordan Reichert, because of one self-appointed petty tyrant, little Hitler, right? The other vegans who were here in Victoria, they never met me. They never got the chance to work with me. And the irony is, I'm not a little tyrant. I wouldn't have tried to lead and control them in that way. I probably would have just engaged them in discussions and would have contributed in that way. I probably would have played a more Socratic role, frankly, rather than being this kind of leader. But you know what? Whatever they could have accomplished in real life or on the internet, like politically, philosophically, in terms of publications, whatever kinds of events, right? There's no comparison between in 7 years what they could have done with me compared to what they would have done without me. The most recent video that Jordan Reichert uploaded had 17 views, 17. 17 views. If you know anything about how YouTube works, especially with a long format video, 17 views is zero. It doesn't indicate that there are actually 17 people interested in your work. It doesn't mean you have 17 actually interested viewers. And that guy has had institutional support from absolutely everybody. He's had organized political party support. He's had donations. He's had all this money and effort behind him. Stuff I've never had in any stage of my career. I did do a fundraiser once for a court case with Dorian Ryder. Not the same thing. I'm not supported by a political party in Canada. I'm not supported by other activists. I'm not supported by groups like Direct Action Everywhere and what's it called, the Save Movement and all these things. He's connected to and supported by all these other institutions. And guess what? He's a fucking idiot. Everything he has to say is boring, and his ideas about and his approach to vegan activism is completely counterproductive and stupid and wrong. And to quote my favorite rapper, 50 Cent, you've been hustling a long time, and you ain't got nothing. Just 7 years. I know he's been doing it for 15 years now. He's been in this game a long time. But dude, I see what you've accomplished in the last 7 years, and it is fucking nothing. So, sorry, this is my point. Sometimes we're talking about this more indirect form of competition where it's like, look, there's only so much oxygen, there's only so much money, there are only so many seats in the universities, and so on and so forth. And sometimes you're talking about really direct competition where one person is snuffing out another. So like for me, this is the same problem I opened the video talking about. For me, these are three different columns of talking about exactly the same problem, which is whether or not any of these people are real intellectuals. I've got a comment from the audience here, quote, "I'm afraid of going to a vegan meetup and getting disappointed." Yeah. And, I think there are really kind of only two attitudes you can take towards that. Either you decide to go to the meetup and get disappointed, because it's worth it, because there's something important, for you to learn in being disappointed, you know. Um, you know, you know what? I'm wrong. There's only one possibility. That's it. There isn't any other possibility. The value of knowing has to be kind of greater than not knowing, and I think that's all I can say about that. But yeah, if you go, you're going to be disappointed. If you go to the vegan events, you're going to know exactly what kind of loser you got to work with, and if you don't go, you're never going to know. It's going to be a matter of speculation, right? Now, look, I mean, sorry, to bring that back to Buddhist studies, my experience with Buddhism, really briefly. If I had just started out with the attitude that all the people in this field are idiots and not worth talking to, that would be one thing. But going out and meeting those people with an open heart and open mind again and again and again, and reading their work and learning about their background and learning what's going on in the field, that puts me in a very, very different position where it's like, okay, I really know what I'm missing. I know who these people are. I know what's possible and what's impossible in Buddhist studies. And with time, I really learned how the whole university system works. Now, it's heartbreaking because it was all bad news. But, Jesus, give you an example. Margaret Cohn. I had email with Margaret Cohn before I met her face to face. If I hadn't met her face to face, nobody could have convinced me how insane and how stupid Margaret Cohn is. You know what I mean? Like nobody, it doesn't matter if someone had told me. I would have never, you know what I mean? I never could have believed it. So Margaret Cohn's a career academic connected to Buddhist studies. And, I could go on and on. It's a different story in each case. They're not all insane, in the same way. And it wasn't always something I figured out based on meeting them face to face. I remember one professor, he's now a professor of Buddhism at King's College London, a very prestigious position. And, when I met him face to face, I could tell he really did not know his stuff. A lot of things having to do with the actual texts, what the additions are and the differences are between them. Like how you do Buddhist studies 101, basically. That stuff, anyway. Anyone with a PhD should know that, and frankly, anyone with a BA should know that. But whatever. So he was strangely ignorant to me. But later, I looked around at an obscure publication in England. I used to read all the Buddhist studies publications, and I found articles and comments from him showing what a culty, what a true believer he was in Buddhism before he learned to cover it up and present himself in a more academically respectable way. Okay, so I'm just saying, different people are crazy in different ways. And then you find out nothing's possible, that you can't work with anybody. And, I quit the Buddhist studies field basically because I didn't like the company. It's like, well, I don't want to work with any of these people. And I'm not going to do this at all if I have to work completely alone. There was a time when I came back from China to Canada, and I had a list of people I was expecting to work with when I got to Canada. And I even bought gifts for some of them. And I wanted to believe the best about all these people. And that included Aaron Janis, included a bunch of vegan activists I knew. And, you have the attitude of, hey, you got lemons, make lemonade. Maybe there's some things wrong with Aaron Janis, but, let's try to do something positive for the animals, for the future of planet Earth, for all these reasons, for all these lofty reasons that motivate us to be involved in vegan activism in the first place. Like, okay, and Erin had written to us at that time. She said directly to us that she wanted to do collab videos with both me and Melissa. That she thought of collab videos she wanted to do for YouTube with my girlfriend Melissa. Anyway, yeah, I came back and I had a list of people I was expecting to meet and do something with, for the movement. And not a single one of them ever met me, and not a single one of them ever did anything. And basically, all of those people have gone insane. or they were insane all along, and now it just shows a little bit more blatantly. I mean, like with someone like Richard with Vegan Gains, can anyone say he went crazy, or is it just that he was crazy all along and he had different ways of coping with it or concealing it? All right, so I am seeing your questions in the audience as they come in. Look, I got to say, being wrong is something that happens to people. But if you're an intellectual, you learn from those mistakes because being an intellectual is about learning all the time. You know, someone like Jordan Reichert, he's not an intellectual. He's also an idiot. But regardless, someone like Jordan Reichert at an early stage, he got committed to opposing horse-drawn carriages as his main form of vegan activism. Now, from the first time I met him, I was setting out these reasons why this is like the absolute worst and weakest approach to vegan activism. Horse-drawn carriage, as you can make a list of I don't know, what do you want to base your campaign around in terms of vegan activism, including that he was trying to get elected. The government was going for mass support, something that's popular with the masses. Talk about an issue that matters to a lot of people. The horses that draw the carriages here are treated better than pet dogs and pet cats. And he's not anti-pet. He's not against domestication of pets, who, among other things, have their testicles chopped off and so on and so forth. Okay, so you have a horse that lives on a field, and then for a couple hours a day, it pulls a carriage, and you're saying this is terrible animal abuse. Well, you're making yourself look ridiculous. You may be making veganism look ridiculous to a certain extent. Meanwhile, here we're even killing whales and stuff. I mean, we're killing all kinds of large animals. But look, regardless, let's say hypothetically, 7 years ago, he decided to make horse-drawn carriages the center of his political campaign for veganism. And what if it worked? What if it was a great success? What if my analysis was wrong? What if, he really struck a nerve with the public and everyone supported this campaign? Oh, God. The other thing he was committed to was sabotaging the traps for deer. So you have periodically a deer problem. There are too many deer downtown in the middle of the city and they block traffic. Oh, so he's morally opposed to trapping the deer. Everyone else who lives in the city, vegan or not, they're aware having deer in traffic is this big problem they got to cope with one way or the other. So it's like you're picking the most marginal, most unpopular issues possible. Hey, what if I were wrong? What if he tapped this huge groundswell of public support and interest has swept him to a position of political power and it was a great success? Well, of course it failed. That's not what happened. Of course he failed and failed and failed and failed. Despite getting interviewed by the mainstream press, despite getting a certain level of notoriety and support from these vegan organizations, which again, I have never had. I have never had the SAVE movement or anyone else supporting what I'm doing. I've never had a political party behind me. I've never had donations behind me, as I've said, for any of this stuff. I'm just not an idiot. But, all of the support I have is due to my being not an idiot, which I appreciate, Okay, well, if you're an intellectual, any kind of intellectual, if you're a real intellectual, is it even going to be 1 year or 2 years that you're committed to those tactics before you're really reflecting on it, analyzing it, learning from the experience, and you're doing something else? Like an intellectual in his position, even if they had made that mistake of committing to two of the most unpopular and counterproductive things to possibly protest, they committed to horse-drawn carriages and sabotaging deer traps for deer that have come into the downtown part of the city. And you can imagine here, the deer tear apart people's garbage and they tear apart people's lawns and they run in traffic. So the public generally is much less sympathetic. The non-vegan public is not terribly sympathetic on the deer issue. They're a nuisance they want to get rid of, and they're quite ready to kill them or shoot them or have the city authorities do so. Don't you think you can learn from that? Don't you think you can adapt? Now, I said right at the start of this video, even though I personally have some level of appreciation for the writing of George R.R. Martin, it's the same thing, right? If George R.R. Martin were a real intellectual and you were not watching sports on TV, you were not watching American pro football, and were not drinking alcohol, It's just not possible that he's stuck on the same sort of narrow selection of themes and the same theses about those themes from the 1970s through to the 2020s. It's not possible. Intellectuals are people who learn, and that includes, learning from your own mistakes. Now, in a weird, subtle way, I think this applies to James Aspie. I think it applies to all these other people we have. I think it applies to Georges Monbiot. Oh yeah, the other big name who went crazy and disappeared. How about Gary Yourofsky? One aspect of being an intellectual is that you don't make the same mistakes again and again. Even if, whether you made the decision as a young person or as a middle-aged person, at some point you committed to one mode of activism, one approach to politics, whatever it is. And then, Lydia is asking if this is pre-recorded. Lydia, I shouted you out just a few minutes ago. What do you mean? You think I haven't? I'm not seeing the comments as they come in. All right, so I'm going to return to this this comment I had on Patreon. Now, so Joel writes in saying, quote, "I think you're just talking about people who are gullible. From my perspective, these aren't intellectuals." And again, that's the part of this comment I really relate to. And then his next example he goes on to is Jordan Peterson. And he says, look, people call Jordan Peterson an intellectual, but look at what he says about Nazi ideology. Now, I don't need to go into this at great depth, and I don't even think that's the best example within Jordan Peterson's extant works, okay? If you're an intellectual, you challenge your own assumptions, you challenge other people's assumptions. You learn, you do research, you change, you adopt new attitudes and perspectives. What Jordan Peterson has to say about Nazism and Adolf Hitler is in very large part based on one book called Hitler's Table Talk. Now, that book at one time was a bestseller in English. It sold a huge number of copies, but today it's largely forgotten. It's not really a famous book today the way it once was. I do not think you will see it for sale in an airport waiting room, but there was a time when it was that big a hit. It was a big hit book. Okay, that book has been completely debunked. It has been proven to be an intentionally written fraud, an intentionally created fraud. Okay, and a fraud created with very specific political objectives by the creators of the hoax. Right? That's now an established fact. Does Jordan Peterson's perspective on the Nazis change? No. There's no change. There's no progress. There's no new perspective. There's no new approach. Does his perspective on any other related issue, Christianity, democracy, these things are all tied up. His idea of kind of hierarchy in society, all these things are tied up to what he has to say. It's really incoherent bullshit he has to say about the Nazis. When okay, I'm not saying this to you in a moral sense where I'm saying to you, you have to change. I'm not saying you would have to make an effort to change. If you are an intellectual, you will change. It will be effortless. You're changing all the time. Like what I think about ancient Athens in the last 4 years has changed. Back when I was with my ex-wife, whatever, more than 10 years ago, I thought I already knew everything I had to know about ancient Athens. I wasn't on an ego trip about it, but I was like, no, I've done a certain amount of reading and I just don't have any reason to do any more reading of that. I was working on Buddhism and all these other things, working on the Cree and the Ojibwe. It was all kinds of things that interested me. At that time, I was married to an anthropologist, reading anthropology and, as always, caring about politics and history. There were all kinds of things I wanted to read. I didn't think I was going to return to the study of ancient Rome and ancient Athens. Well, guess what? I changed, I've discovered books I didn't even know existed and so on and so forth. And I read those books and I see the problems in the books that I already read and I gain a new perspective and I've changed. Now, the point is my view about everything has changed. Like even just within the last 5 years, my views about the history of the United States of America, the writing of the American Constitution has changed. My views about historical figures like Benjamin Franklin, all kinds of stuff, which you're not talking about, which I never thought I'd take an interest in. I never thought my research would bend that way or something, And, I've change, and I'm changing all the time. And I'm doing research all the time, and I'm learning all the time. And yes, I'm challenging your assumptions all the time. Like I try to reach out to my audience and challenge what you guys think or what you assume. But I'm challenging myself all the time also. And again, without making any particular effort, I'm going to change. Now, tell me something. Jordan Peterson, from his own perspective, was hospitalized and nearly died because of the addictive properties of prescription psychiatric medication. Because these medications that he had trusted all his life and he had recommended other people use all his life, and I've seen YouTube videos of him saying that, it's not just my imagination, he discovered abruptly and unexpectedly that these drugs, one, are addictive, that they have really serious withdrawal problems, and two, they have incredibly serious negative side effects. And from his own perspective, he almost died. He was hospitalized, and there's a whole saga surrounding what happened and how he managed to just barely recover his health and or his sanity. Okay, so here's the problem. Jordan Peterson hasn't changed. Even if you compare his first book, written before the hospitalization, to his second book, he hasn't changed. There is one end note. It's not even a footnote. There's an end note in the second book that mentions in about 2 sentences that it turns out these drugs have terrible negative side effects and are addictive, and he hadn't realized that before. He hasn't changed. Now, his specialization, his area of expertise is not the history of Germany during World War II. He's not a devoted researcher of 20th century German fascism or something. That just happens to be a fascination he's had for many years of his life and is a big part of his philosophy. So in discovering that the main book that's the source of his knowledge and his attitude and his analysis of that, discovering that book is a hoax, is a fraud, that should lead you to change. His career is in the field of the science of the mind, psychology, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So when you discover that has been debunked, everything should change. The sense in which he's not an intellectual, or the proof positive, what really matters here, it's not, have you read this particular book, or have you read these 10 books, or have you read 100 books, or are you reading new books all the time? Like there's a really weird sense in which someone could theoretically be illiterate and be a real intellectual. They'd have to listen to a lot of books on tape. They'd have to rely a lot on, conversations. I'm saying here that the real most important sign of being an intellectual, like the litmus test, the evidence you have that someone is an intellectual, is that they can change, that they profoundly change. And I think they're changing all the time without making any particular effort to do so. Now, I got to tell you something. Look at Durian Rider's YouTube channel. He ain't changed. Look at Freely's YouTube channel. He ain't changed. Look at me. I'm sorry to say it, but even somebody like the leader of PCRM, what's his name? Dr. Bernard, right? Yeah. Dr. Bernard, the head of PCRM, he ain't Neil Bernard. Yeah, Barnard. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Dr. Neil Barnard, he ain't changed. He's incapable of change, in this way. So this is, I just say this is really significant. I mean, this is a significant telling sign about who is and who is not intellectual and what the consequences are. So, I say this on a large scale and on a small scale. Now, look, I've followed. Sorry, I mentioned before Georges Monbiot. I actually checked with my blog history. When was the last time I mentioned Georges Monbiot on my blog? And it was 2014. So I have a post here on my blog from 2014 called Georges Monbiot, A Lifetime of Excuses for Eating Meat. Lydia is saying that she regrets that Isel never comes to her live streams. Lydia, I didn't even know you had live streams or a YouTube channel or anything like that. I mean, if you want to send me an email, if you want to talk to me on Patreon, you can. But come on, I don't know anything about you aside from what you tell me, and you don't tell me much. So come on. In a sense, I've known you for 5 years or something, but come on, I only know a series of single sentence comments that you made. Okay. So back in 2014, I wrote, quote, "The most remarkable thing about Georges Monbiot's saga of alternating between veganism and endorsing meat eating is that he has gotten paid to publish his opinion at every stage. What he has to say isn't any better than the type of diaristic writing that now floods the internet for free. And really, it isn't any better informed either. Quote, so now I'm quoting Monbiot. While researching my book Feral, I also came to see extensive livestock rearing as a lot less benign than I or my colleague had assumed. The damage done to biodiversity, water catchments, and carbon stores by sheep and cattle grazing in places unsuitable for arable farming is out of all proportion to the amount of meat produced. Wasteful and destructive as feeding grain to livestock is, ranching appears to be even worse. Close quote, but I continue quoting my own article. So, in other words, after many years of research, countless articles written on the subject, and several published books, he has come to admit to himself a set of facts so obvious that they are consistently discussed even in United Nations agency reports that actively support the expansion of the meat industry. I then have a series of bar charts showing the unbelievably horrible ecological consequences of the production and eating of meat. Quote, these basic facts are so clear, even from a simple visualization of how animals are fed, etc., that for the most part, people can only fail to understand them because they actively prefer to disregard them. And while I can sympathize with that self-deceptive tendency, i.e., we were all young once, it is surreal to see someone who became a self-professed expert after more than a decade of advocacy, authorship, etc., limping along with this kind of recognition of the most basic assumptions so long afterward, and for such shallow reasons as reflecting that Al Gore is now vegan. Close quote. And I end by just saying you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Reflecting on that way. So now look, that was written in 2014, but you can see the same issue here coming in. He has gotten paid for this. He has become rich and famous, and he continues to be. Here we are in 2021, and he's still one of the most influential people in the world. Now, nobody else gets hired for that position. Nobody else gets to be the science writer at The Guardian. That's a once in a lifetime opportunity that he was given for no particular reason. Nobody else is going to have that particular. Again, it's more like a professor's seat or what have you. There is nobody else who's going to have that opportunity. It can't be shared. It can't be shared. It can only be squandered, sadly. And George Monbiot is now an example of someone who's squandered it. But, my leitmotif here that I'm coming back to again and again is, how is it possible for this guy in 10 years from 2004 to 2014? So again, he's researching and writing books. I mean, he's not just watching sports on TV. I mean, I don't know, maybe he does with his spare time also. I don't know that much about his private life. How is it possible over 10 years for you to deal with these facts and these questions again and again, and you don't change? And now we can look at the gap between 2014 and 2021 and say, that he hasn't changed. So I'm just reading the rest of this comment from Patreon at the moment. Yeah. So this is something else I discussed with Melissa recently. So Joel writes, he says, people worship these figures like Jordan Peterson who are not real intellectuals. And even when he can prove that what Jordan Peterson is saying is wrong or faulty or misleading, people will just try to come up with the most generous interpretation possible so they can keep on supporting Jordan Peterson. Quote, you see, the problem is that a lot of people in this generation are very gullible and claim that they do research when they don't. It's not only 17-year-olds, it's also 40-year-olds and beyond. People never talk about the poverty of the mind, but at least this YouTube channel, à-bas-le-ciel, is. And he then says of himself that he wants to have a rich mind and not a poor mind. And he says he's going to share the particular video with his friends because he hopes they can benefit from it if they pay attention to it. There are things I like about Western civilization. There are things I like about France and Germany and England even that I cannot find in Japan and I cannot find in Iran or Iraq. There are things about, Western Christendom, even to put it that way, the traditionally Christian Western European civilization that I personally happen to like. And I'm an atheist, in case you didn't know, I'm a nihilistic atheist. However, I think it's really important to face up to the unique disadvantages of our culture. And it is a culture that's been shaped by Christianity to an unbelievable extent. Why do people pretend to have read books they haven't read? My honest answer to you is that's because our whole culture is built on the Bible. It's built on people pretending that they have read and understood the Bible when they haven't. You could give hundreds of examples of this, but I've even heard stories from people who used to be Christians and became atheists talking about approaching a priest or a pastor, normally this would be a Protestant church father, with a very simple question about what a passage of the Bible means, and of the religious leader becoming furious and even violent, and kind of slapping the person and kicking them in the church, kind of, how dare you ask this, and how dare you impugn my authority? Because the reality was they were covering up for the fact that they really didn't know the text very well, and they didn't understand it. Like, even if they'd kind of seen it before. You can point out these incredibly simple things. I used the example recently of Jesus destroying a tree because it didn't bear fruit out of season. Well, what an incredibly stupid moral to teach children. Oh, if you're angry at a tree because you want to eat apricots, whatever the fruit is, you want to eat apples, and there's no apples on the tree because it's the middle of winter because the fruit is out of season, well, you should just go ahead and destroy the tree. That's what it says in the New Testament. Now, I know, and anyone who's really done the research knows, there was a very particular allegorical meaning to this. The vast majority of Christians don't know that. The vast majority of priests don't know that. The vast majority of church pastors don't know that, and so on and so forth. If they're being honest, they have to say, oh, the text doesn't make any sense, or, oh, I guess I never paid attention. Because in some sense they've read it, in some sense they've looked it over, their eyes have made contact with the piece of paper. But we have a whole civilization and a whole culture built on, to a massive extent, to a really deep extent, not reading and pretending you've read things that you've read. So, Melissa and I were talking about this a couple of days ago, and she was talking about skepticism. And when you tell people something they don't know or they're unfamiliar with, babe, why don't you grab the JFK book? It's right behind you there, the Assassination Science book. The attitudes you get in this culture when you mention circumstances surrounding the death of John Kennedy, former president of the United States. Okay, I'll just to give you one. Some of you know this, but some of you don't know this. So the magic bullet theory, the completely impossible theory supported by the government, involves at its most basic level that when John Kennedy was shot, he was shot from behind and from a shooter who was far above him, from above and behind, from the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. An obscure phrase that's become famous, at least for several generations in English. The Texas School Book Depository. Imagine if they'd called it something else. Imagine if they just called it a warehouse, but no, it was a school book depository. Okay, well, you've got a problem, even if you want to believe that, because the first bullet that hits JFK, for which we have innumerable eyewitnesses, and we also have videotape evidence, film evidence in the form of the Zapruder film, the first bullet put a hole in the windshield in front of JFK and then entered his throat, which you can see on film. He clutches his throat. Again, there were people around him. Everyone saw this. So that's the first bullet. It's not the last bullet that strikes him. I'm not going to go through all the bullets here. Okay, so bullet goes through the windshield. You can see the bullet hole in the windshield on the film, and then it enters his throat, basically dead center of his throat. We have the corpse. We have the x-rays of the corpse. Okay. That bullet must have been fired from in front of the car, and it couldn't have been fired from 6 stories up in a school book depository or any other kind of building. It's completely impossible. And now, if you want to make up another story to rationalize it, which many people do, many people try to claim that, oh, when he clutches his throat like this on the video, That's the bullet exiting, not entering. Yes, well, there's a very obvious problem with that, which is that if the bullet had entered at the back of his neck and exited through the front, it would have destroyed his spine. And the spine and the neck are completely intact in the corpse and in the x-ray after he's dead. Now, this is not the only absurdity or impossibility. Among other things, it would be completely ridiculous. You'd then have to imagine this bullet descending from the 6th floor, exiting, and then going through the windshield of the car. There's so much wrong with it. It's ridiculous. Okay, but from that one fact, this is not the only fact. There's one fact. Oh, okay. So here in the realm of completely rational discourse, this is not a religious question. Okay, so we're dealing with, the extent to which we're talking about a government cover-up, a conspiracy. Okay. One of the ways people respond to this that both Melissa and I have seen, and it's so close to what you deal with in veganism, so on and so forth. One of the ways people respond to this again and again is, oh, but if that were true, somebody would have told me. If that were true, I would already know about it. It's impossible that that's true, because that sounds really important. And someone like me would already know something, this really weird sense of egotism. Now, talk to Melissa about how do I deal with this? I've dealt with this in the realm of pure politics. I've dealt with this, in application to things like the history of Cambodia, history of Thailand, history of Vietnam, history of China, things that fewer people really read about and know about. And, one of the reasons I'm so practiced at this was I had to deal with this within my own family all the time. I had to confront my father all the time and say, look, Barry, have you ever read one book about this topic? Have you read one article about this topic? You have to challenge other people to really be honest about how it is they know the things that they think they know. What is the basis for this certainty you have? You seem to be so certain that you want to shut me down and insult me and denigrate me and dismiss me, which is going to happen. If you talk about the assassination of JFK, it's going to happen. People are going to have that kind of reaction. Okay, so tell me something. How do you know what it is that you think you know? And this is what it is to be an intellectual. When you're an intellectual, you are constantly feeling out the limits of your knowledge. You're constantly feeling for and challenging the basis of your assumption, of any given assumption, the basis for your assumption, the bases, plural, for your assumptions. And that's why you're always learning. Like, it is possible to read books that just reinforce your delusions. Trust me, it's possible. That's what you see in the world. Look at these people who were just protesting with Extinction Rebellion in England. They have a formally organized communist party there protesting with them. They don't see any problem with it. They will not allow vegans to protest with them. They don't want to be associated with veganism, but they'll be associated with quote unquote revolutionary communists. Okay, it is totally possible for people to remain narrowly committed to what it is they believe and only read things that reinforce it, even when within that book they see something they can't really understand or something that challenges their beliefs, which happens with the Bible all the time. Whatever it is you want to believe about, oh, well, did you notice that God has a wife? What do you mean? What? No, I've read the whole Bible from cover to cover. No, you haven't. You didn't notice the part where God had a wife. It's kind of significant, like there were some big problems. There were some big inconsistencies within the Bible about who God is. And did you notice that God has more than one name? Do you notice that sometimes he's Yahweh, but sometimes he's this other completely different God? No, I guess you haven't really read the Bible. Did you notice that this was, composed from different pieces of what formerly was a polytheistic religion? Another one most Christians don't notice. But do you notice the parts that are in support of human sacrifice? Well, what do you mean? Christians don't support human sacrifice. The Bible doesn't support human sacrifice. Yes, it does. And when I was, this is very memorable to me, like the one time I talked to Henia via Skype or equivalent. Henia was trying to tell me that the Jewish religion, that like Orthodox Judaism, supports veganism. And I said, what are you talking about? It's obligatory to sacrifice animals and eat their meat. Most people use the term korban in Hebrew, the korban. And, she was shocked. And I think on some level she knew this. And I had to kind of confront her with it a bit more. Like on some level, oh, right, it's not a brief thing in the Bible. Like, how could you have read the Bible and not know that it requires animal sacrifice. Like, what Bible were you reading? I'm just saying there are a lot of things I do like and appreciate about Western society, about Western civilization. But we have this way of not reading books. We have this way of not seeing the evidence that's right in front of our face. And it's really, really deep in our culture. It's how we relate to the Bible. It's how we relate to the American Constitution. You know, it infuriates me to hear debates with the Constitution, which are, by the way, I'm not some kind of uncritical supporter of the American Constitution. I'm a critic of the Constitution. I can see its advantages. I can see its disadvantages. But you want to debate with me what the Constitution says about the right to own guns, the right to bear arms? So, like, this is not a debate. Like, you know, the text is completely unambiguous. You know, this way of only we have this deeply ingrained culture of seeing what you want to see, disregarding everything to the contrary, and then being tremendously morally self-righteous about it. And I'm just saying, being an intellectual, it's not just the accumulation of the number of books you've read. So I'm going to read your comments here, but there's some people are mentioning examples of Marxists. Whether you're talking about a communist or a Buddhist, you can meet people who have read 100 books, but they're not intellectuals. You know, because if you were an intellectual, you would have noticed these things. You would have questioned these things. You would have, you would have in effect become a critic of communism. You would have become a critic of Buddhism, and you would really know and understand all these inconsistencies and so on. You know? So I just say, look, okay, I'm going to talk about this on a larger scale. I'm going to talk about it on a small scale. What if there is some law of physics that at any given time, only 1% of the population can be intellectuals? There's like a maximum limit for how many intellectuals there are. It's 1%. Some of you probably feel this way. For me, this is hypothetical. What if, whether we're talking about Iran or Thailand or Cambodia or Canada or Denmark, everywhere in the world, for some reason, there's a maximum limit where only 1% of people can be intellectuals. Don't you think there's still a really big difference between living in Thailand, living in Iran, living in Canada, living in Denmark? Like, the role of intellectuals in our society, the status of intellectual in our society, like what it means to be an intellectual, how anyone has any concept. If only 1% of people are going to be intellectuals, should James Aspie be leading the vegan movement? Should any of these people? Should Henya should Freely? Like, we still have a problem here, guys. Like, even if that's not flexible, even if we can't hope to pump it up from 1% to 3% of the population who are intellectuals, the status of those intellectuals in society, the status of those intellectuals on social media, the status of those intellectuals within a small scale example, like the vegan movement, right? Still really matters. It's still going to make a huge, tremendous difference. And we all know it. Everyone here knows veganism is anti-intellectual. Are you fucking kidding me? Veganism is as anti-intellectual. It's more, okay, I'm going to say this for real. Veganism is more anti-intellectual than hip-hop music. It's possible to be an intellectual in hip-hop, in rap music. It's possible to be appreciated for that. And it's possible to boast about it too. Veganism is completely, deeply dyed-in-the-wool anti-intellectual, right? Now, look, it's not my problem, but, Catholicism is anti-intellectual. Buddhism is anti-intellectual. Like, really, all of these things, like, what is the status of intellectuals in any of these movements? And are they intellectual movements? I'm just saying, and this is a question that comes down to, so it's big scale and small scale. Like, small scale will be something like the vegan movement. And you can think about it as an individual. I got a piece of fan mail recently. I believe the guy said he was 17 years old, 17-year-old guy. And relatively recently, he discovered my channel, and he said he was watching all the videos that are in season 2. So he's seen now many, many, many of my videos. And, I can take a compliment, but here's the problem. He said, I have never seen any other YouTube channel like à-bas-le-ciel. I don't know of any other YouTube channels like this. I agree. I don't think there are any others. I don't think there are intellectuals on YouTube. I don't. Now, can I plumb the depths of my memory to try to find a counterexample? I don't know any. I mean, I've said for years, I don't know any intellectuals in the vegan movement. Who's going to interview me? Who's going to look at who actually has? I've reached out to and collaborated with all kinds of people. And, again, being a medical doctor doesn't make you an intellectual. Trust me, having a PhD does not make you an intellectual. This is not about formal educational attainment nor informal, right? So I'm just saying there is actually a really big problem here. If this is it, and again, nobody can have an omniscient knowledge of every single YouTube channel or anything like this. But I own a copy of the New York Times from this Sunday. I could bet you money. I don't think there's a single article in the New York Times written by an intellectual in this issue. Again, I'm not saying the whole history of the newspaper. I'm sure once in a while they have a book review written by somebody who's a real intellectual. Once in a while, somewhere there's an op-ed column by someone who's a real intellectual. I hope. But seriously, I've been through several copies of this where we go through every page and look at everything in the newspaper. Okay, I don't need the prop, but all right, Melissa's handing me the newspaper. I do actually have a copy of the New York Times here, in case you don't believe me. I got it for free. Long story. Didn't pay for it. And we're not even going to read 1% of it. But anyway, yeah, it's really a much deeper, much more serious problem that there aren't 10 other YouTube channels like mine, that there aren't 100 other YouTube channels like mine. And the pages of the New York Times, whether you're talking about elite level discourse or local discourse, the pages of the New York Times are not crowded with intellectuals. We have a local newspaper here, what is it called? The Victoria Times Colonist. So wherever you live, if you live in Detroit, it's the Detroit Free Press. Like today, local newspapers are very humble. There's not a lot of money in them. You know what? Even if you live near a university, look at the fucking university newspaper. There is nothing intellectual about university publications, about university newspapers. Nothing. Yeah. So you did work at yours? Yeah, oh, okay. Right. Okay. So I was involved with the university newspaper. Well, anyway, nothing's wrong. It's funny we never type that, or it doesn't come out much. Okay. Anyway, you can go through, pick up your local university newspaper, or look at a small local newspaper. You go through every page. Is there a single article here written by an intellectual? Is this in any way trying to be intellectual? And it's not, So, yeah. What was the title of this video? So we're living through an epoch of fake intellectuals. Yeah, so the title is Fake Intellectuals, Fake Revolutionaries, Fake Vegans. Okay, so look, guys, I can answer your question. I can wrap it up. I mean, I think the part I've said the least about, but many of you will know how I feel about it already. I've said the least about the fake revolutionaries. But I made a series of videos, really like a trilogy of videos here that I really recommend you guys watch. Don't miss them. Where I'm talking about what's been going on with Extinction Rebellion, what's been going on with the most high-profile, anti-climate change ecological activist group. And it's incredibly worrying. But it's even more bizarre now because here we are 2.5 weeks later. And, they made these. So that's the trilogy of videos, if you guys don't already know them. They made these bombastic promises, frankly, revolutionary promises. And we've all gotten to see just how false those were. Yeah, it would be a very different thing to be living through a period of time where we had fake intellectuals, but real revolutionaries, or perhaps real intellectuals, but fake revolutionaries. But all three are really fake right now in 2021. Fake intellectuals, fake revolutionaries, and fake vegans. Okay, so babe, if you want to say something, you can jump in, but I'm going to look at the comments from the audience. But you count. You also can comment as well. So, Loik An says, this could be a Cambodian name, Loik An, and if it's not, I'd pronounce it differently. It could be Loich. Anyway, Loik An says, why is there so much pseudo-intellectualism nowadays? I mean, I think there are two sides to that. One aspect is just that there are so few real intellectuals that it creates some kind of reward for being a fake intellectual. And the other is that nobody wants to be the jerk Nobody wants to be the asshole who debunks a pseudo-intellectual. And it's so easy to do. It's so easy to prove that these people don't know what they're talking about. Like just in this very simple sense, haven't done the reading and so on, and they're not really committed to the things they pretend they are. But, okay, let's be real. People spend far less time having face-to-face interactions with other human beings now, maybe than any other point in history. People are primarily now pseudo-intellectuals, like on Instagram, and it's a very different thing even to meet someone in a coffee shop and really sit there face-to-face and slug it out. So we've told this story before, and we've told it recently. One of the videos, I think, talking about Buddhism. I sat down in a coffee shop in Chiang Mai, Thailand. It was a vegan activist meeting. Some of those people knew who I was, and the particular guy we're talking about didn't, because I'm a little bit famous, especially in Chiang Mai, especially amongst vegans. I sat down with this guy, and he was so used to, frankly, being a pseudo-intellectual, being a pseudo-expert about Buddhism and about the relationship between Buddhism and veganism. Well, guess who just entered the room? Like, guess who you're sitting at a fucking coffee shop table with? Like, I am in a position to hand this guy his ass on this issue. I mean, and look, there's a question here. Do I know more than any other person who speaks English on this topic? Well, there are some other people who know about this stuff, but they won't be honest with you. Like, there are some Buddhist monks in robes who are experts, but they're not. So, like, of all the people you can meet in the whole planet, there are incredibly few who know this stuff, who've done the research, and who will really talk to you about it in an honest way. And again, like, in a sense, I don't even blame the Buddhist monks. Like, if that's who you are and that's what you're committed to, you can't really expect those guys to engage in an honest, open-ended critique of the religion that way. And to really explain why it is that the vast majority of Buddhists do eat meat and always have, going back to the era when the ancient writings were actually written, when the ancient scriptures were written. Now, okay, I mean, Melissa was there. I didn't break this guy down. I didn't make him cry. I wasn't an asshole. Like, I was a little bit kind of ironical, but I also thought he would be more willing to actually talk about it with me and learn from me. I was hoping he'd be more of an intellectual, but no, it was just like pressing play on a tape recorder. He was just doing this routine, and he was not willing to ask himself how he knows the things he thinks he knows, where these assumptions come from, where this certainty comes from. So, why is there so much pseudo-intellectualism nowadays? Because there are rewards for being a pseudo-intellectual, and there are seemingly no punishments. There are no real negative consequences. So let's mention that chick, Claire Michelle. So, and again, how this is face-to-face is different than it would be like if people were actually sitting in a coffee shop. So Claire Michelle, who I've criticized on my YouTube channel for years, occasionally, just less than once a year, I think. Claire Michelle, she says these ridiculous things about religion, ridiculous things about politics, ridiculous things about economics, even, and ridiculous things about her own life and diet and spirituality. She posts those things on Instagram. Who is going to shoot her down? Who is going to, this is a really old-fashioned phrase, bust her chops? Do you remember when people used to say that? Going back in the 1920s here, like, who is really going to say, look, you don't know what you're talking about? This could be anything. It can even be about nutrition. There are people who like to make certain statements about nutrition and diet and so on. Say, look, how do you know these things that you think you know? Like, where is this coming from? You get into a very different conversation. And instead, I mean, you can go to her Instagram. Claire Michelle.
Plentiful soul.
Yeah, right. Plentiful soul is her thing. All you're going to see is people giving her the thumbs up, embracing her, applauding her. I don't even know if 1 in 100 comments are going to be negative. And when they are negative, they don't accomplish anything. When they're negative, someone just says you're an airhead. Someone says you're an airhead or you're a hippie or something. It doesn't really get into the issues. Now, look, again, I have experience really sitting down with communists and trying to deprogram them, really saying, no, like, I understand this is what you believe about history, but that's wrong. That's a lie. And asking questions and bringing it together, trying to make people aware of the extent to which they are living a lie. They're committed to a whole series of lies. But that's incredibly rare. And I mean, for any of you in the audience, if you reflect on your own life about something you were wrong about in the past, again, maybe some of you used to be communists. Maybe some of you used to be Christians, some of you used to be Mormons, used to be something else, used to be something else to believe in. And think about it, who cared enough and who took the time and who thought it was virtuous and worthwhile to sit down with you and try to deprogram you and try to confront you with your own pseudo-intellectualism, you know? So yeah, I'm just sorry. I know it's a short comment, asking why is there so much pseudo-intellectualism nowadays, but that's my real answer. Now, look, think about the period of time we're living through. Was George Bush an intellectual? No. Was Barack Obama an intellectual? No, he still isn't. In his retirement, he isn't. Was Bill Clinton an intellectual? No, and he still isn't. Is Bernie Sanders an intellectual? My honest answer is no. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not an intellectual, and she can't even pretend. She's not even a pseudo-intellectual. You know what I mean? Is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez an intellectual? Like, think about the rewards for being a pseudo-intellectual as opposed to the risks and what comes with it. Now, look, you guys just wouldn't know the names. I could go through the list of professors at my university here. Like, I could sit here with the list, say, is this person intellectual? No. Is this, like, my university professors, one by one. For those of you in the audience, maybe you haven't been to university. If you make a list of your high school teachers, the gym teacher, the math teacher, the English teacher, Mr. McGregor, the school principal, was he an intellectual? No. Was she an intellectual? No. Like, I think for you also, it's going to be no, no, no. And maybe there's one exception. Maybe there's one you remember, like, oh, no, that guy was an intellectual. Maybe there was. Maybe you met one. But whether it's your university professors or it's your high school teachers, some of them might be pseudo-intellectuals to the same extent as Bill Clinton. You know what I mean? They might be on that intellectual level. But yeah, these are the people we live our lives surrounded by. And guys, it's very easy for people to be on an ego trip just because they're smarter than their own high school teachers. I mean, so many people, that's their standard of adequacy. And then normally it's not even that they're smarter than their school teachers, just that they're more cynical. They spend their whole lives feeling they're superior to everyone around them. It's a huge problem amongst atheists. Anti-religion activists, they feel they're smarter than their high school principal and smarter than their town priest. And they spend their whole lives on an ego trip as a pseudo-intellectual. So yeah, Sam's a longtime viewer, that he still catches himself saying, "Oh my God," and when he says "bless you" too. So I don't, Sam. I don't. I have a number of catchphrases, but in real life, I like to say "by the dead gods." That's one of my catchphrases. So I have a number, but you guys. By Odin's beard. I intentionally have non-Christian and atheistic kind of curse words. And you guys didn't know me, but I used to curse in Pali. I used to curse in the ancient language of Buddhist scripture. Do you remember? I had a whole different vocabulary. So I've been through several rounds of training myself to not say, oh my God, or something. To have an exclamation like that when you stub your toe or when you drop something. Yeah, just those momentary curses. Yeah, by the dead gods is a good one. I've got to say, I got that idea from comic books growing up as a kid, because a lot of the fanciful villains, they'd have some distinctive curse words that reflect their ideology, partly because swearing wasn't allowed in comic books. I remember the Russian villains would say, "Great Lenin's ghost." It's their equivalent to oh my God, this kind of thing. Yeah. So anyway, Sam says, so obviously some of this is retreading stuff we've just been talking about. Nothing wrong with that. But Sam says, so many self-professed socialists and communists haven't even read Marx, Lenin, etc. They follow others that distort that information. They certainly haven't studied the historical reality either. But I think you'll find as life goes on, Sam, even when you meet the people who have, they read it in that biblical way I've been discussing, where even if they've looked at the page, they don't really see what's there. It's this very strange way of not reading what's right in front of your eyes, not taking seriously the intent of the author. And I think very consciously, very much intentionally, imposing your fantasy onto them, imposing what you want it to be onto the book. And look, guys, sorry, this comes back to, again, I posted to Patreon. This comes back to the leader of Extinction Rebellion. I'm sorry. So what's his name? Roger Hallam. Roger Hallam. Roger Hallam is also a crazy Christian among his defects. And when you hear this guy talk about the Bible, it is 100% personal wish fulfillment. It's 100% him telling you what he wants the Bible to be and represent, and not dealing with what it actually says. So I post so often to Patreon. I have to scroll down quite a ways here. They won't get it. But anyway, I posted to Patreon a link to a video where you get to hear him for about an hour going on and on about his frankly insane religious views. So anyway, that's the guy you've got. That's now the most prominent ecological activist on planet Earth. Our fate, the future of global warming and having an alternative is supposedly in his hands. And as I say, there's someone else who could have that opportunity and doesn't, because he's taking up that seat. There's only so much oxygen to go around and only so many millions of dollars. It's not just money, it's time too. It's only so much time for the volunteers and everyone else involved to be doing this. So yeah, it's a real shame. And nobody checked his credentials. Nobody cared to question him and find out how solid his interpretation of the Bible was before they took this plunge. So just reading your comments, guys. I'm catching up here. Various intelligent comments, but I don't know. I don't know what the point is me just kind of agreeing with myself. So I mean, one person says, this is like Anne again. Like Anne says, now in the era of information, people have become lazy. So they try to compensate by regurgitating ideas from others. I'm just going to be real with you, like, or Leich. I haven't even seen that. Like, I just, I don't, oh God. We met this one guy who quoted Nietzsche from memory. Melissa knows who I'm thinking of. The bodybuilder guy.
Oh,
Yeah. He would actually go around quoting Nietzsche. But like in my whole life, people who even quote and regurgitate ideas from other people, it's very rare. I don't even see that. Like, I don't see. And again, look at the university newspaper. Look at your local newspaper. And you can even look at the New York Times. You can look at international newspapers. I don't see people even trying to be intellectuals. And again, look, I despise the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. I am not a fan of Nietzsche, and I have made YouTube videos talking about that. But obviously, like, it indicates when I met this bodybuilder and like right at the start, he started quoting Nietzsche and this, like, there really wasn't much context for it. Okay, you can tell this is a guy who's read these books and he's really trying to present himself as to some extent intellectual. He's making that effort, but I don't even see that. I don't see people even regurgitating the ideas of others. Is it?
I have already forgotten his name, but recently you and I were talking about another pseudo-intellectual who is not vegan, but has been known as a food expert. And his claim to fame is that he wrote a book about psychedelics.
Oh, God. Yeah, I don't remember that guy's name either. Yeah.
Yeah. And this
Did you
is
have
the kind of thing that is now being embraced, that people who have done psychedelics are somehow intellectuals.
Yeah. Anyway, look, it's sad. I'm being 100% honest when I say this, you guys. Actually, this comes back to the comment from Patreon that I made this recording in response to. I do not believe that the enjoyment of life and being an intellectual are mutually exclusive. I don't think that one is an alternative to the other. I don't think that you either choose to enjoy life or be an intellectual. I think intellectuals are the people who really enjoy life. You know what I mean? Really. I really believe that. That's really what I am. That's my lived experience. That's what I embody and know and what have you. And, if you put it in any particular, uh, particular workplace, you can see that easily enough. So, it's a bit of a stereotype in the army that in every unit, there's one guy reading Nietzsche. Not sure, there's one guy reading books of philosophy of some kind, but it's often Nietzsche, you know, out of that army unit, who's the happiest guy, who's leading the most meaningful life. Like you all got to sleep in the same tent at night kind of thing. Like you're all living in the same conditions. You all eat the same meal out of a bag. They give MREs, rations that come in a plastic bag. But, you're living the same lifestyle in so many ways. You're marching up and down the same hill. But one of you has brought a book with you. One of you is leading the life of the mind a little bit in your spare time. I do not view being intellectual as the opposite of hedonism, as the opposite of the enjoyment of life. What we have right now on a massive scale is a kind of false hedonism, and it's people getting rich and getting famous by encouraging others to use mind-altering drugs to get high, and also body-altering drugs using stuff like steroids and so on, which I've been talking about on my channel lately. It's people encouraging one another to quote unquote enjoy life. And what they call the enjoyment of life is misery. So I'll come back to this comment from my Patreon. I don't believe that intellectuals are the people who are alcoholics and committing suicide. I just don't believe it. That's not my vision of intellectual at all. I would not be surprised at all if I learned that right now George R.R. Martin is suicidal. He certainly has been at some point in the past. He's talked, a lot of his books have talked about being suicidal and lonely and depressed. And some of them have talked about hallucinogenic drug use and alcohol too. I don't know to what extent those things are part of his past, but he's written about them. Okay. How much does George R.R. Martin weigh? I mean, he's grotesquely obese and has been for most of his life. He sits there watching sports as this tremendously obese old man. It's very easy to look at him. And again, you just look at him and look at his writing and say, no, this guy would be much happier, as an intellectual. I just say, I totally understand all the comments that I read to you from Patreon, from both sides. They were, genuinely well-intentioned. They were not being overly harsh or contrary in relation to me, nor in relation to one another. But no, what I'm here to say is that is not being an intellectual. And it's not like, every so often I hear that the Super Bowl is on. I'm walking down the street and there's a poster or so, like something obstructs my path to inform me that the Super Bowl is happening. Do you think I ever once regret that I've been reading this book, whatever it is, that I've been writing this book, that I've been making YouTube videos talking to you guys instead of watching the Super Bowl? Do I ever think, oh, I missed the Super Bowl? Like the pleasures that non-intellectuals become addicted to, they are so paltry. They are so despicable compared to what the life of the mind has to offer you. And I really mean that. Now, look, guys, every single one of you at some point has been to the dentist and been on painkillers. You've had teeth removed or had some kind of operation where you were given painkillers, and they may be exactly the same opiates that people on the street are addicted to as drugs, and I'm telling you, as an objective fact, heroin is not pleasant. Opiates are not pleasant. Fentanyl is not pleasant. Using opium or fentanyl is not happiness. It doesn't make you happy. And at the other end of the drug spectrum, using stimulants, using cocaine, using caffeine is not happiness. It doesn't make you happy. Like there's a very fundamental, misinterpretation of what happiness is, whether we're talking about hallucinogenics, psychedelic hallucinations, or you're talking about these other kinds of drugs, So now, this even extends to alcohol, of course, So look, I know it's really easy to think that the life of the mind is the opposite the life of the body. That somehow this is a sacrifice of true happiness in order to live the life of the mind. But no, on a really deep level, this whole conversation for me has presumed the exact opposite. That's wrong. And look, as I say, you've been to the dentist. Are any of you today going to think, oh, if only I could have that feeling again that I had when I was stumbling on my way out of the dentist's office that day? If only I could recapture that feeling of being sedated and on painkillers when I left the dentist that day, that's something intoxicating and appealing to you. Now, look, as I say, I'm not going to deny that there is a sense in which these things are pleasant, but they are incredibly paltry pleasures compared to the life of the mind once you've got it, compared to being a real intellectual. And you get to a certain point where you don't even have to read anything more today. Like, I could sit on a park bench watching the sunset, and I have so much to think about, in terms of the things I've read in the past and what it is I'm going to write next, what it is I'm working on, what I'm doing as a creative artist. Even if that's thinking about my next YouTube video, it might not be, but I'm writing a book right now, whatever it is you're doing. But like, sitting on a park bench, doing nothing, sitting still with my thoughts is more valuable to me than the paltry pleasure you might get from becoming high on opioids. It's more valuable to me than whatever pleasure there is in watching baseball, watching football, or so on. And we know that. We know that because we've lived it. And I know a lot of people, they've never had the experience. They've never even thought it through. They've never thought about, oh, wow, what if I develop my mind to such a point that I genuinely can't enjoy watching football anymore, where I regard sitting in front of the TV watching football as a waste of my time compared to turning off the TV and sitting there on the couch and just looking at the blank TV screen. Like, I'm not joking. That's better for me. That's more, that's what it is to really enjoy your life. That's what it is to be an intellectual. The life of the mind, you have with you always, whether you're sitting on the couch or you're sitting in a prison cell. Now, I'll just end this by saying, look, I asked you before, when you look at a situation where everybody has the same job, so everybody's working at Starbucks together, or everyone's in the army, sleeping in the same tent, marching up and down the same hill together. So, okay, so who's the happiest guy in this army unit, or who's the happiest guy working at this Starbucks? Really, it's going to be the one who has the life of the mind. It's going to be the one who's an intellectual. Even if they're a beginner intellectual, but if there's somebody who's really an advanced intellectual, you can be happy working at Starbucks. You can be happy, working at McDonald's or serving in the army, because the life of the mind you already have with you. You have a meaningful life, and you bring it with you everywhere you go, and you have the analytical capacity and detachment to apply to all things in your life, great and small. But the saddest thing of all is, man, you don't have to be talking about a prison cell. Look around any classroom at a university. It's so fucking sad. And I've been in that situation so many times where I sit down, in the small crowd in a university classroom. By the way, small, sometimes there are 8 people. A lot of time I got to know all 8 of the other students in the class. Sometimes it's 20 people, whatever. I'm not talking about sitting down with hundreds of people. I'm not generalizing about people I don't know. I really got to know the other students where I'm sitting down in the class, and as the lecture starts or as the discussion with the professor starts, because sometimes it's discussion format where you sit in a circle and discuss the professor. Everyone else in the class is radiating the sense of, I shouldn't be here. This isn't for me. I don't really understand this. I don't, they're radiating. You absolutely see it in their body language, and when they're forced to speak, in what they say and how they say it, they are radiating the sense of, this isn't for me. I'm not in my domain. I'm in the wrong place. And I'm the one person in the room who's sitting there completely self-confident, completely, oh, this is for me. This is what I'm cut out for. You know what I mean? And I think you guys know, I think you guys can imagine. A lot of the time, I'm a lot more comfortable than the professor. And a lot of the time, I know more about the subject than the professor, and so on and so on. And God, it can be something I have no prior familiarity with. I have no prior education. Whereas, oh, okay, great. And guys, I can be the one behind the podium too, just as easily. I can get up with no preparation and take over teaching the class. So, I just say, like, being on a university campus, it's the most wince-inducing. It's the most painful, because if you're in prison or if you're in an army unit, there's no expectation that anyone should be an intellectual, that anyone should pretend. And when you're on the university campus, you know exactly what the opportunity is that's been offered to these people, and exactly how it is that they're squandering it.
I thought of his name, Michael Pollan, and he's also a professor, right? That's the kind of person that you're seeing on campus.
Yeah. Okay, guys, thanks for tuning in. I got nothing more to say. When my ex-wife was going through her PhD, I remember she asked some of the people who had already completed their PhDs for advice, and most of them, and sorry, I should clarify a little bit. This is very specific advice, like, how did you get a translator set up to do this, and what form did that? Because my ex-wife's PhD dealt with Chinese and then an indigenous minority language within China. And who did you speak to at this institute to get this done? So this wasn't life advice. This wasn't advice about how to live a meaningful life, how to be an intellectual. Specific advice related to how to finish the PhD. And one of the most common answers she got from these people, with slight variations in wording, was, nobody helped me, so I'm not going to help you. Nobody helped me when I was in your position. I had to figure all this stuff out for myself. So you're just going to have to figure it out for yourself also. So she heard that a lot. She heard that a lot from people. And, I don't know to what extent they were embittered, or to what extent they just accepted their place in society, that this is how the world works. That now they're on top because they've finished their PhD or they're a professor or whatever. And, that they embrace the system that for so many years took their money away, but now is making them wealthy. It has now given this position of power to them. It's a choice. I've said, I know some of you guys may regard this as like something of no significance when I say it in passing in these videos. But when I say things like, look, I grew up watching Batman 2. I grew up watching Sesame Street 2. I grew up watching these terrible movies. I didn't have positive role models. My school teachers were not intellectuals. My schools were terrible, primary school and high school. My university was terrible. My university teachers were not intellectuals, university professors, and even on the level of pop culture, for my generation, what were we supposed to look to as an example of being an intellectual? I'm going to tell you right now, Kurt Cobain. And I think this comes back to exactly the wording of this comment I got on Patreon, where someone says, oh, well, why are so many intellectuals lonely and miserable and either commit suicide or die because they're alcoholics? You're not thinking about an intellectual. You're thinking about Kurt Cobain. Who was an intellectual in terms of what film and television and music, and look, let's just be clear here. It is neither more nor less ridiculous to say Kurt Cobain is an intellectual than it is to say Elvis Presley was an intellectual. They are at the same level, okay? And how about the Beatles? We looked up, remember the Bed In for Peace with the Beatles? Jesus Christ. Yeah, Yoko Ono and the Jesus Christ, John. And that's a different generation. That's not my generation. Maybe for my parents' generation, I think you'd have to be a little bit older than my parents to be young enough to be naive like that when that happened. But anyway, I'm certain there were people who regarded John Lennon and the Beatles as intellectuals, and Kurt Cobain was not an intellectual. Jerry Seinfeld is not an intellectual. I mentioned this recently to Oliver. Oliver has his own YouTube channel, and he was shocked. I said to him, "Look, when I was your age, like I had no idea how to be an intellectual, and I was going and watching like art cinema from France, which was not intellectual, but black and white films from France, supposedly made by and for intellectuals." And I remember one Italian director also getting his films out because this was supposedly the most intellectual stuff in the history of filmmaking. And it's like, gee, how to be a self-pitying middle-aged white man who cheats on your wife, and it's just sorry, it's as ridiculous as calling Jerry Seinfeld intellectual. It's as ridiculous as calling Elvis Presley intellectual. It's just not at all. And Woody Allen, supposedly America's great intellectual filmmaker. Watch Interiors by Woody Allen. Again, so look. I mean, this relates back to also. Oh, great example from the audience, George Carlin. Wow, no, that's deep. So for me, I never was a follower of George Carlin, but that's a great example from MX2 in the audience. And I've known so many people who were really shaped by that. Where that's what they think. Yeah, rather than Jerry Seinfeld, it's a better example that they think of George Carlin. And George Carlin's interview on the Tonight Show, like the way he would give interviews, they think that's what it is to be an intellectual. And no, in absolutely no sense, George Carlin was not an intellectual whatsoever. That's just as ridiculous as imagining Elvis Presley, being intellectual. So yeah, before I said part of our problem and why we have so many pseudo-intellectuals is the absence of any positive examples as any positive examples of intellectuals enough. Another great one came in, Mother Teresa. People think that, sorry, not me, but definitely there are Catholics who look up to some figures like that as, oh, these are the intellectual leaders of the church. And like today, if you want to talk about the right wing, what about, what's his name? Ben Shapiro. Those guys, right wing, but there's always been someone like him. There's always been a kind of right wing radio talk show host who pretends to know it all. You know what I mean? Right. Sure. Right. Yeah. You have to be the right generation for some number of decades ago. Someone like Rush Limbaugh, someone like Ben Shapiro. Right. So, sorry, before I was saying there's the absence of real intellectuals, right? But we're also growing up with really fake examples of what intellectual is or what intellectual is supposed to be. Wow. Sorry, a little water. I didn't see this. I just wasn't looking there. Wow. Grace, this cuts deep. William Shakespeare. It's fucking true. It's so true, bro. No, I mean, Shakespeare was not an intellectual. And Shakespeare's plays, there is nothing intellectual about them. Nothing. I mean, same thing with George R.R. Martin. I'm not going to say Shakespeare was a bad writer. George R.R. Martin is also a good writer. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if you like a nice turn of phrase, you know what I mean? But that's not what we're talking about. But no, yeah, read Shakespeare's sonnets if you want to know how much of an intellectual he was. Yeah, no, I mean, William Shakespeare, he really was. I mean, he was the, he was the Beatles of his day. What can I tell you? He was the, yeah. So yeah, most of us, we come into this game with this real disadvantage, at this real kind of deficit. And, it's a choice. I'm not going to be like those PhD supervisors and so on. My ex-wife was talking about these other PhD students, PhD candidates who surrounded her at Cambridge and Oxford. My attitude is not like, well, nobody helped me, so I'm not going to help you. No, I really think it can make a tremendous difference. If for some people in this audience, and by the way, I was talking about this the other day with a friend of mine who's a university professor. So she said, she's a friend of mine who's a university professor, and she said, oh, well, the young people who watch your channel, she was suggesting they were maybe disillusioned followers of Jordan Peterson. Totally reasonable theory. Like, oh, these are like 17-year-olds who figured out Jordan Peterson is full of shit. They go on channels. And one of the first things I said back to her was, look, they're not all 17. There are guys who are 35 who write into me and say, hey, look, only now after watching your YouTube channel do I realize I need to quit playing video games. You know what I mean? Like they realize the importance of quitting video games. Only now after watching your YouTube channel do I realize my own ignorance under headings X, Y, and Z, and I have to hit the books. And so many people wrote to me, so many, I can't estimate the number, who wrote to me or somehow got in touch with me and said, hey, look, only now do I realize my whole approach to political activism is wrong. That their approach to vegan activism, or maybe in some cases anti-war activism, peace activism, ecological activism, but it's mostly vegan activism, where they realize, whoa, I now realize my approach to political activism is completely wrong. I've been doing the wrong thing for 10 years. So it's not, I just say, it's not just 17-year-old boys. It's not even predominantly young boys. I think you can be a middle-aged man. I think you can be 40 years old, or you could be 50 years old and discover this YouTube channel and go, whoa, there are guys who are in their 40s and 50s, and they have spent their lives trying to live like, Kurt Cobain. There are people who've been really, pursuing false idols, for all these years. And, the good news is, if you have breath in your lungs still, it is not too late for you to change. I'll say this too, part of nihilism is that you do not believe in fate. You do not believe in destiny. And even if you're an atheist, it's really easy to slip into that way of thinking. Okay, I have so many brothers, well, whatever, all of you in the audience have brothers and sisters. You just think, oh yeah, that brother of mine, he was always going to be an alcoholic. That sister of mine was always going to be a drug addict. And this one was always, he never could have made it through college. He was always going to be a college dropout. It's really easy to look at things that way. And if you're being honest with yourself and really examining your own life, it's like, no, at this particular time, I read this particular book for this particular reason, and it changed. If I had read a different book, or if I just hadn't read that book, I guess, again, the accuracy of my own memory, I hold myself very accountable that way. I'm aware that there wasn't any destiny. There wasn't any fate to this. I could have ended up just as brainless as my own older brothers. I know these ideas came into my life in a very particular way. I saw a science fiction TV interview. So there's a TV show that interviewed science fiction writers. And one of them mentioned in passing Dante's Inferno. The guy just said something like, oh yeah, Dante's Inferno, it's one of the most influential books in the history of Western civilization. And then he goes on to say this thing about his forthcoming science fiction novel. And I wrote it down. And I went to the library and I got it out. And I was either 11 years old or 12 years old. My father would remember. My father was proud of that for the rest of his life, because he hadn't told me to read it. He was like, no, he, like my father would say, like, oh no, you were always brilliant. Like he's literally said this to me. He's like said, like, oh no, I always knew you were brilliant. You read Dante's Inferno when you were 11 years old. It's like, yeah, I didn't know anything. I heard this mentioned on a television interview. That was all I knew. I didn't know anything about this book. I didn't know anything. And I went to the library and took it out. Now, by the way, Dante's Inferno did not change my life forever. If anything, I can look back at that and I see the tragedy where it's like, I didn't know what to read. I didn't know how to educate myself. I didn't know how to help myself. And my father, as you can tell, was no help. He was no help at all. I remember my father was tremendously impressed. So the first book of Dante's Inferno, I got out of the library. And then he bought me for the next Christmas that came up. So a couple months later, or whatever it was. I forget. Maybe it was only a few weeks. I totally forget. But anyway, sometime later, he then bought me volume 2, Dante's Purgatory. But it was by a different translator. And he could tell I wasn't putting it on. I was really not happy with it. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, but the quality of the translation, it's really just not as good as the other book, right? So whatever. Here he has this 12-year-old. He just loved it. For him, it was an ego trip. He felt like this was his own genetic superiority or something. I didn't know anything. I'm sorry. I didn't know anything. And that's why I read Dante's Inferno. I read the whole trilogy. And it didn't help me. What I was reading was the wrong thing. Another book, something that was more helpful that I did read. And again, my father was tremendously impressed by, and he didn't tell me about it. I didn't learn about it from my father. But, I read, oh, babe, do you want to grab your copy of Plutarch? So I just bought Melissa a gift. I bought Melissa a copy of Plutarch's Lives. It's a nice Loeb edition of Plutarch. But, I remember exactly the circumstances in which I was standing in a bookstore And I'd never heard of this book before. I'd never heard it. I didn't know anything. And I stood there and pick it up and I'm reading the back cover and I'm flipping through it. And I think it was $1.99. Like it was an incredibly cheap book. And, even then when I next talked to my father about it, which was next day or a day or two later, I was like, so, I found this book and it's just titled Lives, Plutarch. I didn't even know it was a famous. I was like, well, it seems to be, so it seems to be the basis for Shakespeare's, Julius Caesar, and anyway, I knew nothing about this stuff, and it's just like, sorry, in my case, I'm not going to generalize. I'm not going to say this about all of you in the audience. I've got to tell you, in my case, I feel the extent to which this was just luck. This was just happenstance, and I can also feel and I can regret and resent the unfortunate happenstance that I didn't have better luck, that I read the wrong books, that I had such a bad education, and that nobody helped me, and that nobody guided me, that nobody told me how to be intellectual, what I had to learn in any way, and step by stumbling step, I made it out of the ignorance I was born into. But for me, I mean, the very accuracy of my memory and looking back on my life, I think makes it impossible for me to be deluded into thinking there was any kind of destiny or fate or even any kind of redeeming quality on my part that set me apart from other people. I mean, look, what is the redeeming quality? I heard about this book I knew nothing about, Dante's Inferno. That was it. It was just mentioned that it was one of the most important books in the history of the world. And I wanted to know more. Like, that's it. That's the quality I had. I saw a copy of Plutarch's Lives and I wanted to know more. You know what I mean? And I wasn't satisfied with mediocrity. And ultimately, these other people we've mentioned, there's also the dissatisfaction. Shakespeare wasn't enough for me. Karl Marx wasn't enough. I thought Karl Marx was shallow and dumb. So we can go through all these lists of kind of great people, but that I wasn't satisfied with the band Nirvana. Sorry, Kurt Cobain. I wasn't satisfied with the supposed genius of Kurt Cobain, the way like everyone else in my generation was. So, there was a fundamental sense of dissatisfaction and that there had to be something better somewhere. So yeah, that's the end. I get it. I think it's really easy to go through that process. And, I went through it with so many different fields. I went through it with Buddhism. I went through it with Korean Ojibwe. I went through it with, the ancient Greek stuff. I went through it with, with learning Chinese as a language and with everything related to Chinese language and Chinese politics. I went through it with academia itself, with how universities work. And it's really easy to come out of that with this embittered sense of nobody helped me, so nobody's going to help you either. But as you guys know, I've come out of the experience instead with this commitment to the opposite. When one of the first really important articles I published about Buddhism was dealing with on a technical level how to be a scholar of Buddhism. It was explaining to you the structure of the ancient texts and what they are, and really ultimately what you should read and which versions of the text you have to compare. And it openly stated, it was presented as a lecture in Cambodia to people growing up in Cambodia who don't even have the advantages we have, like growing up speaking English, saying, okay, if you're born and raised in Cambodia and you want to be a scholar of Buddhism, you really know nothing. What do you need to know? So I just say already at that stage, I was really trying to help the next generation of scholars, even within Buddhism. And I've been trying to help the next generation of vegan activists and ecological activists and intellectuals of every kind. And, I'm willing to talk about my mistakes and say, no, you don't have to make the same mistakes I did. And the great thing about YouTube is, even if I die tomorrow, there is this really meaningful sense in which this is here for you. This is here for someone who's born 10 years from now, or, whether it's 10 years from now or 100 years from now or whatever, there's this sense in which, nobody has to make the same mistakes I did ever again. And nobody has to grow up only with their choice between Elvis Presley and Woody Allen for models of what it means to be an intellectual.